I know most of you probably have not met too many Baha'is. I'm just guessing that. If you have, that's fine. If you haven't, that's fine too. Baha'is are not a religion that's going to say we want to be everybody to be like us. No, we want to be every religion to be unified, to work together, to help develop the future of the world, because we know that all of us really need to be able to work together if we're going to be able to survive the next. I think literally the next 30 years. Most of the researchers say that we got 9 years until what, 2030. We've read that. It's in the academic papers. And so, but 2030, 2040, 2050, I'll probably make it to about 2050 before I die. But, I hope that we can continue to develop the world. But we can talk about justice, and the Baha'is will say a Baha'i quote is, "The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor." If I look at justice in Ukraine today, the issues, I'm sure you must have read about it somewhere. Mr. Putin, by the way, who I knew in 1991 in St. Petersburg when I was living and working in St. Petersburg, Russia. Mr. Putin says that Ukraine is Russian. And it says, okay, if you guys don't like that idea, we're going to just level you and kill everyone there. We'll take it that way. Ukrainians, of course, say we have never been Russian. We've always been Ukrainians, and we can look at history and you can see why they say this, because it's true. But basically, we know that, we're going to be developing some very serious problems in the coming years. But it's not just, the issue of, let's say, Ukraine and Russia. It's so many other things that are beginning to create problems, not just in Ukraine and Russia, but in Europe, all over Africa, in the Middle East, India. It doesn't matter. It's the world. So oftentimes, I like to say we live in one world now. Maybe back in the 70s when I was in the United States, we always thought that we were kind of an independent, kind of a separate entity. I think the reality is today that we are not, that we're all living in a world that's integrated and has been integrated over and over again in 50 years. Sometimes the integration has been positive. Sometimes the integration has been negative, as we can see in many situations today. So all of the existential crises that we are faced with now in the 21st century, it's a mindset that views, I'm reading it, the individual as a purely self-interested economic unit striving to accumulate an ever greater share of the world's material resources. Such a crude understanding has largely been rejected at the level of formal theory as simplistic in conception and destructive. This, I think we have to look at this in different ways, whether we're in the United States thinking about it or other parts of the world, including Ukraine. We are looking at a situation now, if you look at the research, that if GDP continues to grow at its current rate of growth, the population in the world continues to grow at its current rate of growth, then I would say the 99% of the scientific community in the world, not just in the United States or Ukraine or Europe, 99% say that we are heading towards an existential crisis in the coming 10, 20, or 30 years. Because it is not about, we cannot only be interested in self-interest economic units. Just looking at the United States, I'm not going to say too much because I don't live in the United States, but it's frightening to see how bad this has become in the United States, in the last, let's say, 10, 20 years, and it's gotten worse, and it continues to get worse. I personally love Capra. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Professor Capra. He's now, I think, in California at one of the universities. He's a great guy. And of course, what he talks is system view of life. We need to be able to look at the world from a systems point of view. So even if we're talking about, humanity, we're talking about the people on the planet, we have to understand we really are one person. We are really one family, you might call it that. In the world, there may be African Americans, there may be Chinese, there may be whites, there may be Native Americans. In the end of the day, we all share a certain, let's say, fundamental, foundation, in terms of the fact that, yes, we are different. We might speak different languages and have different thoughts, but we do need to live in a world where we work together systematically for the future and for our children, particularly because I'm afraid for younger children as they go forward into life. Again, here's something, I like the graph on the right-hand side just to show you, in 1975, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but if you can, in 1975, that's when I left the United States. That was when the United States was at a very good time in terms of equality and inequality. It was pretty good, My family had no big problem in buying a house and myself going to university. I didn't have to get into big debt like the kids in the United States do now. And you can see at the beginning of the 20th century, there was quite a bit of inequality. And now we're looking at the end of the 20th century, even up to 2020. And we're seeing inequality has gone out of the sky just about. And this is something that has to be dealt with, and how it's going to be dealt with. I believe the religious community, of which you are a member and I'm a member, we need to be able to understand that we are all individuals and we all live on the same planet, and we have many of the same objectives in terms of how we're going to develop our capacities and our spirituality, and so how are we going to succeed in that? That is a big question, I think, that many of us must have. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the wealth in the United States, creating the world anew, leaving no one behind. All of these things are all important things that we need to be able to deal with. I'm not being able, I can't simply go through all these things in just one time, but I will show this one, and because I really like this. I don't know if any of you know a guy by the name of Robert Reich. He's also I think he's in the San Francisco area at the university. And basically, I think he's a great guy. I don't know if any of you guys watch him on YouTube and that sort of stuff. But he talks about, what's been happening since, let's say, the mid-70s when I left up until now. And really, there's been some rather dramatic changes, and most of them have been changes that you might want to say not towards a positive trait. Of course, we're looking now at a situation in the United States, all of the different inequalities that exist, the climate problems, the water problems, all the other problems that are, dealing with us. All of these things are problems that are, integrated into a system. And so because of that, we simply can't sit back and watch and things is going bad. We need to be able to do a lot more. Say, let's work together. Let's you and me. Let's find other people. Let's discuss it. Let's find the best way to move on. And let's think about how we live. And so I'm going to finish this with one or two more things, and then I'll let it open up for just some basic, questions if you want to go in that direction. But I think, in terms of us who have been working in climate issues and stuff, we know we are surpassing planetary limits. We know that if we've studied any of our climate reality, we've studied anything that's going on, the 6th IPCC report, we know that we are in trouble, and it's going to get worse, particularly if we don't start doing something about it like tomorrow, So now here's one that I don't know. This is what I talk to children about, and I'm going to end up on this one. I have more slides, but I won't show them unless somebody wants to see them. But when I'm dealing with young people, and young people that are, any religion or no religion, basically, when I deal with young people on my farm, which is kind of a distance learning center in Ukraine today, basically, I want them to realize that, we have a certain, let's say, fundamental basis, foundation, we might want to say, about how we want to live. And we often use the word in the Baha'i faith, and I think in other religions also, to develop the virtues, the spiritual virtues. This is what we all need to be able to live a positive life. But in addition to that, of course, I'm frequently talking these days about minimalism, because we know if the planet is going to continue to grow, the economy is going to continue to grow farther, the issues that are going on, we simply have to understand that this is not going to work. It's not going to be successful. We're going to run into a lot more problems, many of which we've already seen in the western part of the United States, in places in Africa. For example, I used to work in Bangladesh. I think Bangladesh, a lot of the eastern side of Bangladesh are going to be underwater in the next 10 years, amazingly so. I mean, there's just so many things going on in the Middle East. I mean, how did all the Syrians Well, how did they all escape from Syria and run towards Europe? Why? Because of water restrictions, because of climate problems. And so, they used to be able to grow crops in Syria, then they all dried up and people didn't know what to do. There's just so many different things that are going on, but we need to be able to understand that we do not need to live in a life that leads us through to have excessive materialism. We can live more simply and probably more happily and more successfully and more spiritually if we live in a different kind of a way. My parents never worked more. My father worked about probably 40 hours a week. My mother didn't work at all when I was a child. And that, of course, changed over the years afterwards, when all the ladies now are probably working full time. And basically, we lived quite a bit differently at that point in time than today. And we're getting worse because of the increase of the economics, growth and the types of things that are going on in societies around the world, not just in the United States, but also in Ukraine, also in Europe and other countries. So we got a huge amount of issues, and I'm going to be quiet now and see if there's anybody who wants to chat a little bit. But essentially, to me, the only thing that I would really like to say, as a group, as all of us who believe in one God, who believe in the basic, I think, fundamental values of how we are going to be living, all of us need to find ways to develop these capacities in society and make sure that we begin to work together and to begin to overwhelm some of these existential crises that are, now beginning to threaten, I would say, our very being in many cases. In Ukraine, of course, in Ukraine, you all know what's going on. I'll tell you more about it if you will. It's awful. It's disgusting. It is hard to watch without having tears in your eyes. We know millions have left the country. We know millions have moved to the western part of Ukraine. We know that children and families spend their nights at times in area shelters under the buildings in which they're housed in. And so all of these things are ongoing today, and these are not going to stop until we find some way to stop it. The EU, of course, is doing things to help, Ukraine, to protect it, but we're losing thousands of individuals, even women, even children, and others. Food, as you know, I'm an agriculturalist. There's no question about it. What happens if Ukraine and Russia can't sell the 30% of the food that we grow and sell to other countries? What's going to happen if this war stops that? That means that people in Africa, people in the Middle East, even some in China are going to have problems eating. Ukraine has the largest sunflower crop in the world, and we're the biggest exporters. Guess what? They won't even let us leave the port, to deliver this sunflower oil around the world to places where it's needed. Not to mention all the grains, all the wheat, all the other kinds of crops that are here, the maize, the soybeans, which the Chinese like to buy, and other countries. So we are in a big difficulty, and I think we all need to work together. We just can't say, oh, well, I'm Baha'i, you guys should do what I say. No, we don't think that way. I don't think we think that way at all. I think we should be thinking we belong to the same God and the same belief system. Okay, maybe there are some differences, but the difference is not, how we're going to see the future of the world. I think we're all agreed on those things. We're all agreed that climate change has to be put under control. We're all agreed that this inequality has gotten out of control. But we do not want to see a society where democracy is going to be belittled and fall apart. We want to see us working together as societies. In Ukraine, we try to be democratic. In Ukraine, maybe we're not perfect, but we're a whole hell of a lot better than Russians. So, we do try to be democratic and work together. And that has to be, I think, the future of the world. Throw it on the screen real quickly. But basically, we can talk about spirituality. And of course, that is important. And we all pray every day, and we all work towards having the qualities of spirituality. And to think that Baha'i spirituality is any different from your spirituality, I think it's probably nonsense. But never mind. Here on the screen, this is beyond my capability to really get my head around. Unconscionable quantities of wealth are being amassed, and the instability this creates is made worse by how income and opportunity are spread so unevenly, both between nations and within nations. Here we can talk about the United States. I can talk about Russia. I can talk about Ukraine. I can talk about Iraq, where I used to work. But we have to be able to find ways to say our qualities of life, the purpose of our life, the reason why we live is more important than wealth, is more important than materialism. We know that that's the case. All of us that are in this room now, we know that's the case. But what happens outside the world where we live in, we see things that totally going out of hand. What can we do? I don't know. I mean, we all have to figure out some way to do it. Certainly, my idea is to work with young people, but not all young people want to go in that direction, but some do. And those are the ones that I try to work with. And hopefully, we'll begin to see some improvements. The older generations seem to be kind of stuck in a certain framework, maybe including me. And the younger generations are different and are willing to look, at the world in a different perspective than maybe we grew up with. And if we continue to maintain the same perspective that we grew up with, the older folks, we are going to be developing a very bad situation for the younger people as they grow up. I think there's some way that we have to be able to integrate the spirituality that we have as religious, as people who believe in God and faith. We have to somehow integrate those, let's say, virtues or spiritual requirements and say, we need to really be able to work collaboratively in a kind of a unified fashion for a different kind of world that's going to save the future for these young children. And that is something that I do with the children that I work with. That is what I want to do. We need to be able to work together, think together, believe together, pray together, so that we can find ways to overcome all of these things that are impacting the world today and are not going to go away unless we start to do something positive about them.